8. Right, it is 6 minutes past 8. Our main news this morning is the Cass review, which says children have been let down by a lack of research and remarkably weak evidence on medical interventions in gender care. Paediatrician Dr. Hilary Cass is calling for gender services for young people to match the standards of other NHS care. She also says the debate around transition has become toxic.
Her 388-page report, which was commissioned by NHS England, makes 32 recommendations on how gender services for children and young people should operate. She's been speaking to the BBC about her report and told Justin Webb there's been a shift in the people coming forward to gender services.
So about 15 years ago, the service was seeing perhaps 50 predominantly birth-registered boys in childhood. And over the last 10 years or so, it's switched to over 3,000 young people. And it's mainly birth-registered girls presenting in early teens. And as you say, often with quite complex additional problems.
Were those additional problems addressed properly in your view?
Well, no, because of the toxicity of the debate. They've often been bypassed by local services who've been really nervous about seeing them. So rather than doing the things that they would do for other young people with depression or anxiety or perhaps undiagnosed autistic spectrum disorder, they've tended to pass them straight on to the GID service. And they then ended up at the back of a very long waiting list. The team did start off by doing a clinical trial, but the point at which practice diverted from the evidence was when they went on to routinely prescribing before the trial results were available and also prescribing to a wider group of young people.
Why do you think they did that?
They clearly felt that they were doing the best for this group of young people, and obviously they would have seen some young people who they felt were improving. But we do know once the study results were released that some young people were improving, but some young people were getting worse. And that's not surprising because their broader range of problems were not being addressed. It is unusual for us to give a potentially life-changing treatment to young people and not know what happens to them in adulthood. And that's been a particular problem, that we haven't had the follow-up into adulthood to know what the results of this are. That's the reason why I've said that we must improve the research base here. So that means finding out what happens not just to the young people who go on to puberty blockers or on masculinizing and feminizing hormones, but also those who don't go on a hormone pathway. We need to know how psychological therapies help as well.
That was Dr. Hilary Cass speaking to Justin Webb earlier. We spoke on this show this morning to former Big Brother contestant Hallie Clark, who's a transgender woman.
I think that as a society, we're becoming more accepting, so people are more confident to come out and explore their gender identity. It's not a case of them being influenced. We live in a generation where it's much more accepted and people feel more comfortable being who they are and living their truth, that they feel confident to seek out medical help and advice in their identity. I can only speak on my personal experience, but I was 13 and I knew who I was from a very young age. You can look back at baby pictures of me and I was always in a blonde wig. I was always wearing pink, playing dress up. Like, I always knew I wasn't in the right body. And I know I'm Hallie. I know I am a woman. So there's no identity issues or development issues that have gone wrong in my experience. Like, I know who I am.
If you want to listen back to the full interview with Hallie, you can do so on BBC Sounds. It's about 7:10 on the show this morning. Helen Joyce is a journalist and author of Trans When Ideology Meets Reality and the director of advocacy at the human rights charity Sex Matters. Morning, Helen.
Good morning.
It's a long report. There's a lot to get through. Have you managed to pore over it, and are you broadly happy with its conclusions and findings?
Yes, I got an embargoed copy yesterday and did some speed reading. It's an amazing piece of work, and it is a stinging indictment of the NHS, of the regulators in healthcare, of the politicians, I have to say of the media too, including the BBC. It's only very recently, apart from Hannah Barnes at Newsnight, that the BBC has covered this issue at all well, all of whom have looked away as a medical scandal unfolded with vulnerable children at its heart at the NHS Gender Identity Development Service. She anatomizes that scandal clinically and coolly. She says that there is no evidence that the treatment offered stops suicides, which is one of the main things that is said about it. There's no evidence that puberty blockers help. The entire rationale for the treatment that was offered is ideological, not evidence-based, and the clinics refused to cooperate with her on a long-term study to get the evidence that she needed. So all in all, it's an absolutely shocking piece of work.
One of the lots of striking points within this review, and one of the things that that caught my eye actually was the fact that the NHS gender clinics were apparently not forthcoming with cooperation when it came to trying to fill in gaps in follow-up data to try and, as in, if you want to try and assemble an evidence base to show you what's going on, you need all of the data, and they weren't apparently willing to provide that. And I was wondering what you made of that.
It's actually one of the most shocking things I've seen in nearly 20 years as a journalist. You may remember that Sajid Javid, when he was Health Secretary, actually had to change the law to make it possible for Hilary Cass to get the linked data she needed from both GIDS, which is the child service, and then the adult gender clinics. And all of us have NHS numbers, but those NHS numbers may be changed if you transition. The clinics actually refused to give her the data. She uses the word thwarted. They thwarted my research, she says. And one of the appendixes in the report, Appendix 12, is her letter to the Specialist Commissioner for NHS England saying, please make them give me this work. I just can't believe this because, you know, I've been covering this since 2017 and other people have been covering it longer. In 2017, I already knew that there was no evidence base here and that what emerging evidence there was suggested that we shouldn't be using puberty blockers, not that we should. They've been in use since 2007 in Amsterdam. And here we are with the NHS refusing to cooperate with an eminent paediatrician who's been tasked by the government and has spent 4 years doing a really high quality, the first proper high quality study of outcomes here, and they refuse to help her to get the data she needs. I honestly think there should be questions asked of the people in charge of these services, questions asked at the highest level.
Do you think that this review ultimately will make life better, will improve the lives of those children on this very long waiting list and their families?
Giving people bad care is never a good thing. I really understand how somebody who's on a long waiting list and who's not getting any help would think, you know, I need help. I need any help I can get. But bad help is worse than nothing. And what I'm sorry to say that the NHS treatment for gender distressed children has been worse than nothing. It has been a treatment that is based on ideology, not evidence, and that has caused probably harm. So yes,
I will just push back on that slightly, Helen. I think what we're talking about is a lack of evidence. So we don't really know.
The evidence that's emerging, the evidence over the last few months all leans in the other direction, actually. The emerging evidence is that
that's not the conclusion that Hilary Cass draws. She says it's just remarkably weak evidence. That's what she says.
If you look across all the papers that have come out recently, you will find that every paper that comes out is on one side, and it is the side that there is harm rather than help. So yes, I repeat that this has gone on for a long time. Hilary Cass says the evidence base is weak, but the emerging evidence is that harm is being caused. In any case, even if there is no evidence, these are drugs that stop people going through puberty, stop their brains developing, stop their bodies developing, cause infertility or sterility in adulthood and anorgasmia, so people will not have normal sex lives, and that put people onto a pathway where they take cross-sex hormones that also cause severe physical harm. So this is obviously a very risky pathway that you would want to have excellent evidence of benefit to support. Just saying there's no evidence when we know the physical outcomes are sub-ideal is not good enough. And I understand that individuals feel that this may be the right answer for them, but that's because this treatment pathway has been pushed very hard on social media and by the trans lobby groups. And so, of course, kids think it's what they need. What she's saying is let's treat these kids the way we treat all other children with complex and vulnerable needs, based on evidence and sound science.
Let's put a text to you that we've had in. It says, as the mother of a trans boy, I'm so tired of the debate, the political views on the topic, instead of a national plan involving funds for proper services. What the government and this report are doing is removing the almost non-existent support until the medical services get more information. In the meantime, we have to be parents, therapists, supporters of these kids who are seriously struggling. There's no spike, but a generation without taboos who are more free to talk about their issues. There's no trans kid or adult who would freely opt to identify as the opposite gender, considering all the trauma behind the condition. What do you make of that?
So there's a long section in Hilary Cass's report about why people identify as trans and why there's been a big uptick in this and why there's been a huge increase in the numbers going to the child gender services. And she says it's multifactorial. So yes, gender identity does appear to have some biological basis. I'm not sure I completely agree with that, but that's what she says. And there definitely is an influence from social media, and one influence she missed is in schools teaching. There's just no doubt about that there is some element of social contagion here. We know that now. We know that from the changing case mix. I really feel for this parent because she's quite right, or he, I'm not sure which it is. They've been left without the help they should have been given, and that's because the NHS was asleep at the wheel. This clinic was acting absolutely outside its remit and offering a treatment pathway that was not based on evidence, and that was not picked up by the people it should have been picked up with, the people in charge of NHS England and the regulators. If they had been doing their job, they would have been doing the research that should have started back in about 2014 when the NHS started giving puberty blockers routinely. And now we would know the answer. This parent wouldn't be in the situation that they're in now, that they don't have the data they need. I mean, people talk about this toxic debate, but what there actually is there's one side that has refused to debate, that has refused to do research, that is stymieing the research that Hilary Cass is trying to do. And there's another side shouting increasingly loudly, saying, please, please start looking here. This is not normal. This is not what the NHS should be doing. Do your jobs, everybody.
Thanks very much for your time this morning. Appreciate it. That's Helen Joyce, journalist and author of Trans When Ideology Meets Reality. This is what the NHS have said. The NHS has made significant progress towards establishing a fundamentally different gender service for children and young people, and will set out a full implementation plan following careful consideration of this final report. Nicky will be in from 9, and he's going to be asking, gender, are we failing children? It's 18 minutes past 8.
There's an ongoing